Hi, I'm Harnoor and I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Eve, and I also use she, her pronouns.
We're Novel Youth Ambassadors, joined today by Mira Jiang, who uses she, her pronouns, a member of Novelly's Rising Voices Collective and author of River of Stars.
So, River of Stars tells the story of Sizi, a wandering cowherd who stumbles on the celestial cloud weaver Zhinu, whose name I'm definitely mispronouncing, and who Mira is going to correct me as we go through this episode. The two women fall in love, but struggle to make a home for themselves out of sight of Junu's disapproving mother, the Empress. This story is a sapphic retelling of the traditional Chinese folktale, which I personally love, the Cowherd and the Weaver.
Yeah, I really loved this story. I really loved folklore and mythology retellings growing up. I was obsessed with like all the Greek mythology. But yeah, reading this, I realized just how like Eurocentric a lot of retellings tend to be. And I think it's really, really amazing that like in the past few years and like in this story, we're exploring the mythology of other places and retelling it. And, you know, because like stories from everywhere matter and are amazing. And I'd personally never like read or heard of the original folktale before, but it was just sort of like really amazing to be exposed to the myths of another culture. And I also like love that it's like a sapphic retelling of a traditional Chinese folktale because as a queer Asian American, it's very easy to feel isolated from your culture because of your queerness. And I think it's a really important representation of intersectionality because it's sort of like, making a place for queer Asian Americans in the culture, which I think is awesome. And I just really wish that like I had had a story like this when I was little and like reading a bunch of Percy Jackson and stuff.
No, exactly. Like literally everything that Harnoor just said. This is like reason 1 billion why I'm obsessed with young writers too. So just like to summarize, you took the mythology of a vastly underrepresented culture and vastly more interesting. Like, do we really need to hear about like how Zeus got another woman pregnant here? And then you not only wrote three-dimensional woman, passing basically every woman representation writing test that there is, but you make them fall in love with each other and you wrote it all really, really well. Like the intersectional representation is really incredible and really important. I hear a lot, primarily from white male readers, that authors are like forcing representation. Like a character can only have one marginalized identity, or else it's just pushing it. Um, like people try to claim that representation is being taken too far, whatever. Like, what's next? A second gen immigrant, neurodivergent Jewish woman. Like, hi, my name is Eve. I'm a second generation, depending on how you count, neurodivergent Jewish woman. Like, it's not forced diversity. People just exist. And like queer low income Chinese young women exist, even though Sizi doesn't. And the representation in this is really important of like identities and of cultures and of people, and also of like in the synopsis, the first sentence is like Sizi has always been more comfortable with her ox than other people, and like same. And that's so incredible too, because you write these characters and this story with really well rounded, and they have lives and emotions and quirks. And while no one's like gay in real life just to further a plot, so many authors create characters with marginalized identities and just leave it there. Like it's either their entire personality and they're totally 2D, or they only show up for like the BLM episode. And like, hello, J.K. Rowling, an author who is diverse in real characters and simultaneously writes really beautifully, is calling, and her name is Mira. Like, hello, I just love your story.
Wow, oh my God, I love hearing Eve. I love hearing Eve go off. I've missed it. I've missed it so much. Uh, so thank you once again for being here today. And I think we can get into our questions. My first question is, as we mentioned previously, this story is based on the folktale, The Cowherd and the Weaver. Could you tell us a little bit more about this folktale and where you first heard it, and also why you chose this specific one to retell?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me. The Cowherd and the Weaver, when I was growing up, I used to live in China with my grandparents, and they were really big on like the old folk tales and folklore. So I would hear like a legend every night before bed. It was like my bedtime story. And that one grew to be one of my favorites, I think, just because I love the magic, I love the ox. And the original myth is unfortunately not sapphic, but it does follow a cow weaver whose original name is Nan in the legend. And he does meet this cloud goddess called Zhinu who comes down and they fall in love. And the Empress does ultimately try to tear them apart. And this legend sort of tells the tale of the Chinese Valentine's Day, which is called Qitiao. And it happens on the seventh day of the seventh month of the lunar calendar. And that's when the magpies form that bridge that I mentioned in the story that cross the River of Stars, which is actually the Milky Way galaxy in the sky that the Empress created to separate the two lovers. And that's when they meet every day of the year. And I chose to sort of do this story in particular as a retelling because one, it was just a legend I've always loved growing up. And two, just felt like the idea of forbidden love is especially prominent amongst the queer communities today just because of societal norms, unfortunately, and lingering homophobia. And I wanted to sort of explore that in a story that I used to love.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Like that's such a like better Valentine's Day story. I don't know what ours is. I think it's just like a guy who married a bunch of people and then he died. Um, like he married the people to each other. But oh my, that's so beautiful, and I really like the idea of, especially yeah, like retellings about forbidden love, being retold in like a queer way, you know, because yeah, like as you said, it is often like you know forbidden or you know having to be like done in secret and yeah everything about I just love the I love the story so much. It's so cute. Um yeah, you've I'll hand it over to you.
I know, no, literally. Like, Hunter, you just called it like cute is like literally like I'm going for these characters. Like, do I know this is a folk tale? Do I know how it ends? Yes and yes. Am I still completely emotionally invested in this story? Also, yes. I'm actually just like in general, I've been really interested in like the deep personality of these characters. Like folk tales can be simplified into paragraphs, which can make for like really easy like definitely I've been told bedtime stories too of like Jewish folk tales or um it's also like an easy like Wikipedia thing for when I need to reread about Zeus or something for middle school. But you've told yours in 7 chapters, which is really cool because it's left all this room that you've filled for character development. And I was really interested in how you or people around you have influenced these characters that you built like from a pre-existing foundation, but you built them and how your characters have maybe influenced you.
Yeah. These characters, I feel like what you mentioned about folklore is definitely true. It can be told in such a short period of time because it's very much glossing over the plot. And that's why I very much like retellings, reading them and writing them because there's so much room to explore with characters. And sort of like almost every character I build, I do take bits and pieces of people from real life. There's no one that it's really based upon, but it's like kind of this mosaic of little traits from both myself and just the people I know that come together to form these characters. And I think in both of these, there are just parts that I admire about both of them that sort of did make an impact on me as I was writing it. Just the determination they had to be together and this sort of like, no matter how long it takes, that they trust that they will find a way to be together.
Ugh, I'm not an actual ambassador here. I'm just a fangirl for these authors. Like, yes, I agree with you. Like, yes, absolutely.
That was so beautiful. Like I'm finding a way to be okay. Yeah, we're literally just like fangirling over this couple, as we should. You know, they are adorable. But I was wondering a little bit about. Ooh, I might. Could you give me a pronunciation guide on the the baby's name.
Oh, Taohua.
Okay, Tao Hua, who I think is like a character. I tried my best. And characters, I think that both represents like human cruelty as well as hope and second chances. And I thought that was a really beautiful sort of like duality represented in this character, and it just really stuck with me. The image of like this baby who's like first like abandoned, like showing like how horrible people can be, but then also like and then like saved and then taken care of and nurtured, and showing like how beautiful and wonderful humans can be. And so I was just wondering, when you were writing, what did she represent to you, um, like in terms of the story and in terms of like symbolism?
Yeah, so for me, Taohua first sort of represented me trying to follow that original legend because in some versions, Zhinu and Sizi's counterpart Nyonan had children when the empress separated them. So I was sort of playing around with that idea, and I kind of wanted them to, I guess, like find a child to adopt. And the idea of Taohua sort of came about inspired by the area of China's one child policy when it was still in a culture where sons were very much valued. And because they could only have one child, daughters were sometimes set aside or abandoned when families hoped to have sons. So that sort of inspired the exposure portion of it, where Talha was abandoned to die by her family, maybe, who valued sons more. But like everything in this story, it's all about second chances. Like Junu and Sizi had been separated before in the story, and they found each other again. And I wanted to give this child a second chance to at a real family.
Excuse me, I'm crying. Come back to me. That's so beautiful. Like seriously, the thought that you are putting into your characters is so important. Like I I remember the first time I read a Jewish character in like a popular novel. It was like this wayside character. Her name was Lavinia in like a Rick Riordan book. It wasn't even the original Percy Jackson. It was like way back. But I was obsessed because she wore a Star of David necklace. And because she was gay and she had pink hair, and like these were things that I could relate to, but more importantly that I'd never seen in mainstream media. Like I was just so excited. And it's like to a point where when I'm looking back on my younger self, it's sad that we are getting like so that woman, that young girls, that youth with marginalized identities hold these characters on such a high pedestal and in such a great light simply because they are one of the rare occasional characters who are like them, who were like me. And I love that Novelty is able to bring the voices and a diversity of other characters into light, because it's seriously like even now, like I've read literature with three-dimensional women, but even now reading like this incredible character development of this woman with one does not depend on a man. Like yes, she is gay, but like that was like such a huge point for me why I'm such a fangirl of this book. And it's just like I think it's incredible the way that young authors are able to do this and then actually carry that out and apply that. Like when writing this, how did your younger reader self influence that, or your current reader self? How did your own wants in media and literature influence how you wrote your own story?
Yeah. I think a lot of the writing that I do is just I tell stories that I want to read, and sometimes those stories just aren't available out there. So some of this was very much inspired by, I guess, like my current reader self and my younger reader self, just what I wanted to see in books and stories and literature. And guess the like independence sort of these characters was just the fact that people, I feel like, make a big deal about three-dimensional female characters and like independent ones, and I think like as they should, because we should be having more of that in literature. I think an area is to just that you can have a woman be strong without turning her into a man. Like she doesn't necessarily have to be masculine, doesn't have to be tough. And I feel like for a while, in YA novels, that was very much what I found in the vein of tough women, was that they took on very masculine traits. And I wanted to sort of showcase how that could also be done without, giving up femininity.
Can I get your autograph?
Yeah, oh my God, everything you just said, like, and I think, yeah, that's what's always really bugged me about, like, whenever people talk about, like, strong female characters, they're always, like, really sort of, like, unemotional, and they're kind of, like, like, they're fighters, and it's like, well, you've just written a male character, right? And it's like, you've ignored all the complexities of femininity, right? And I think, what was it about? I think it was about the Wonder Woman movie, like the first one that came out, where she was like both this very like powerful character, but also like had very distinctly like feminine traits, right? Like she still believed in like hope and goodness, and she wasn't just this like really sort of brooding male character that had been, just given a female identity, right? And I think that's so amazing. And I think like even when people try and write like, because I think generally we've overcome the whole like damsel in distress thing, but like now when people try and write female characters, they come out very like flat and two-dimensional, because it's like, oh, we're just gonna make her perfect basically, right? And then also, just impossibly strong and basically a man. And like I think it's something like that this is the reason why I really prefer reading from like female authors, like, and like, even they don't get it right like a lot of the time, but like, understanding, women as complex, right, really helps you write them as like, write these like really beautiful, wonderful, complex characters. And that was like something that I really admired about Sizi, was that, she was like literally like a person that I could meet. Like she wasn't just some like archetype. She didn't fall into like one, broad like camp of character or the other. Um, and speaking of that, like she obviously is like a character that you created, new. Like I don't think like she was part of the original folktale. And I was wondering like when like how did you go about deciding what you would change and what you would keep in this story, and why did you choose to make like certain preservations, and why did you choose to change other things?
Yeah, so Sizi actually was based off of the male lead in the original myth, Nyonan, who also fell in love with the Cloud Weaver. So she was sort of a gender bent version of him, but I kind of like took that further, just added her own traits. In the original Nyonan, at times, depending on the version, he was a bit of a jerk. So I kind of wanted to, make Sizi just like a nicer character, one who maybe did struggle more, but who came out all the better for it. And the parts of the myth that I definitely changed was at the end. Um, I believe in the original myth, it's just since it's setting up for that Tea Towel Festival, that Valentine's Day, it just explains how the magpies form that bridge for them every day, or yeah, one day of the year. And I kind of wanted to give it a slightly happier ending because I wrote it according to the original myth where they saw each other once and didn't know when they would be able to actually be together. And I'd shown it to my friend and she's like, oh my gosh, that's so sad. Like, why did you make it like that? I feel like they need happier ending. So I definitely changed it a little to give them that sort of hope that they are ultimately working to be together.
No, I loved the ending. Like precisely like I don't remember when I first heard this folk tale, but I was definitely familiar with it, and I was definitely like around chapter 2 I was like, oh, I like these characters. I don't really like, I hope there's a different ending here because now I'm sad. Like now I'm emotionally attached. But the ending of the story is still like you said, it's not your typical happily ever after. They aren't on the way to the castle getting ready to make babies, and they're like, it doesn't end like in a carriage drawn by horses. But I think that that's really cool too. And like there is a specific type of ending that I think maybe it's just in my experience, but that primarily Western folk tales and mythology don't rely on as much. It's like that heteronormativity and that marriage culture definitely
Mhm.
comes very primarily from Western culture, and I think that it's just yet another facet of why a variety of stories to consume and to be created is so important because one, like you're able to see like all of these different stories and how different cultures approach different stories. Like um there's definitely like in Jewish culture and folk tales, it's always like a bit of like cheerful complaining, for example, or like there are there are things in cultural stories that you just don't see a lot in mainstream media, from things that are as small as like cheerful complaining to things that are like, and this wood represents the republic and the free people of this country, or whatever that the French do. And I think that it's really cool that you do that. Also, like in addition, it just makes for a more interesting and a cooler story. Like how when you typically write, do you write like this in this style when you're not always approaching the happily ever after, or is this a newer thing? Like, talk to me about your writing style and how you felt about this ending.
My writing style, especially for first drafts, tends to be a little chaotic. I don't entirely write with outlines because I like to, when I do make outlines, I tend to deviate from them because I feel like a story, when it unfolds organically, it tends to be different than what I originally planned. So usually when I go into a story, I'm usually not sure if it's going to be happy or sad, depends on what happens in the middle. But with this one, because I was doing a folktale retelling, I was trying to hit the major plot points of that folktale. And when I had written out the first draft, at the end, I saw the ending and it just didn't quite feel right to me because I'd already changed things in the retelling. And I figured like the ending could just be one more thing to change to give it a bit more hope at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I like Eve was talking about, I like that the ending is, happier than the original, but not entirely like the Western, like, oh, they ride off in a horse-drawn carriage towards the castle and there's like fireworks and stuff. And I think something that's always bothered me about like the sort of happily ever after end is that it sort of like erases everything that the characters went through. And it also like I don't like that everything gets like tied up very neatly because like one, it doesn't leave room for your reader to interpret like what could have happened to your characters afterwards, and also like it's not super reflective of the way that the world works ever. Like even if you're building a fictional world, right, like things are never going to be completely totally like neatly wonderfully tied up. Like that's just not how life works. So I really love this sort of like middle ending that's very sort of like reflective of how things are. Like everything gets wrapped up, but you can sort of, the reader has a little bit of liberty with what happens to the characters, and I thought that was really amazing, like you've said. Um, so I've very much enjoyed your answers to the questions. Literally, like if I could like write some of the things you've said and like put them up on my wall, I would. um, but yeah, now it is time for the rapid fire question segment of our podcast. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes, yay. So, um, so what was your favorite specific line or specific section to write in this story?
So one of my favorite sections to write was probably that ending scene because like the title implied, it was all about this river of stars that I'd been building toward the end. And I just really liked building that imagery of like that celestial scene from the point of view of someone who had been down on earth her whole life. And I played around with the imagery a lot and I liked that conversation at the end, the emotional resonance that it had. And I may have also cried a little while writing it, but I really liked how that part turned out.
That makes me feel better because I definitely was like this close to crying reading it. I was like, no, like this close to like just closing my eyes. No, never mind. They did live happily ever after, and had a lot of babies and like, did all of that stuff. That's all I need.
Mhm.
My question for you, which I am definitely gonna take notes on because you're a gorgeous writer, is what do you wish someone had told yourself when you were younger or newer at writing?
I think one piece of advice that I guess I did hear later on, but that I had known about earlier was that first drafts absolutely do not have to be perfect. Like I got it onto the page, and I think that really helped me sort of see how the story would play out before I went in and I started adding in like the pretty phrases and just building the characters. And I think that also takes a lot of pressure off of writing because it is ultimately like if you write, it's something you enjoy doing. And if you're worried about making everything perfect the first time, that takes a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah, I think it was I don't remember, I might have been Neil Gaiman, but he was like, the process of doing your second draft is like acting like you knew what you were doing the whole time, right? Because I think like the first draft
Mhm.
really is just like vomiting words onto paper and then like sort of building a shape out of them. So who would you say is your biggest inspiration as a writer?
Hmm. Honestly, I think although some of his content is could be slightly problematic, I actually am very fond of George Martin as a writer just because the way that he can handle such a vast world and make it feel so lived in and develop all the characters to the point where once you see from their point of view, it's like you can understand their actions even if you absolutely hated them before. I think that's just to be able to accomplish that as a writer is something I really admire.
That's awesome. I really like that. And I think that that's really important of being able to think about the line between the art and the artist. Like definitely sometimes I just boycott men and just don't listen to their music, their books. Like I just don't do it because I'm just tired of like the rapey overtones or like whatever.
Mhm.
I just don't want to do it. But so I give you mad props for just like just like reading a book by a man. Moving on. Which kind of segues into this. What's your like biggest pet peeve to read in books?
I think it's just when a character feels like they have everything coming to them too easily. Like they're just this perfect person who everything sort of works out for them. And I feel like a lot of the times, like that just doesn't happen in real life. Some of this stuff, unfortunately, you do have to struggle a little in order to achieve. And I feel like just some characters, when they're just a little bit too perfect, it's one, it doesn't feel realistic, and two, kind of annoying because you want to be them, but you also know that like that kind of perfection usually doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think like it came up earlier, but like I think tends to be a problem with female characters because like a lot of like you watch a TV show and it's like a woman who's like, I have a PhD and I've raised two wonderful children and also I know like all the martial arts and also like I can do this and this and this, and it's like they were trying to write a strong female character, but they just wrote like the most unrealistic human being ever, right? And you can just tell that it's like a bunch of men in a writer's room being like, she can't have flaws. It's not feminist if she has flaws. um, okay, this next question, it's basically just because it's like I've been fangirling over this book, but but did you have a playlist when you were writing, and like if you could share some songs with it, or if you had like a particular like romancy type song that you associated with like the main couple, like if you want to share.
If you do, I will be listening to it and crying to it during
Mm.
chapter 7.
I personally don't write a lot with playlists, but I definitely like just listening to songs when thinking about the story. I listen to way too much Taylor Swift, so I think one that I really kind of associated with it was Ivy, that song, because it's I think I had to listen to it a few times before I noticed that she never really mentioned any pronouns. So like by all means it could be about two girls.
I love songs like that. Immediately, yes. And that's something that I really like. I mean, actually, I was going to talk about how like using how gender isn't like end all be all and like a plot, and how a lot of people think that like the entire story hinges on these characters being cisgender and heterosexual and married. But now I want to go more in like the direction of how did you. Okay, so in this folktale, you had a lot of potential directions that you could go because it's a retelling. You can like literally do whatever you want, and obviously there's an outline, but really, like you've seen some of the Percy Jackson stuff, like you can really do whatever. And so, what would you say if, in response to those people who are like, but this is not how it was meant to be. This folktale was meant to be heterosexual. Like, what's your? I'm really curious to hear your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say first and foremost, it is a retelling, not the original myth. Like, if someone wanted to read about the heterosexual couple, they could always turn to the original. But I think with every retelling, there's a reason stories are retold, and I think it's to make it more relevant to current circumstances or just what people want to read in like the modern day, sort of. So I think at the moment there is sort of this slight lack of, but definitely want for more queer literature, and that's just how I wanted to retell it.
That's a
Yeah,
very answer.
yes. I totally agree. Like I don't understand the point of a retelling if it's just the exact same thing over again. It's like read a translation or something, you know? And then also I think like personally, like talking about like recently what I've learned about a lot of like Indian mythology is that it was incredibly like queer and like gender was like very fluid, right? And it just like it got erased you know, under like the colonial era, right? But if you go back and you read a lot of you know anthropologists working were sort of like they saw it and they were like, oh well, that can't be it because that's not how we understand things, right? But I think like you know what we're finding out is that like even a lot of what we would consider like very traditional folk tales and stuff, right? Like they because like queer people have always existed, right? And so like they've always existed in mythology as well. They've just been ignored for a very very long time, and so I think that's like another really valuable thing about queer retellings. Um, our next question is: if you weren't a writer, what do you think you would be doing? Like,
Like job wise, I actually do have a plan to pursue this, but I think I would be a doctor. I do want to go into medicine and to, just be able to help people in that kind of way.
Oh
it's
my
wonderful.
gosh, can I just like transplant you into like my place so my Jewish parents can be like, yeah, that's great. Thank you. Exactly. I was just curious as to what your specialty was, if you know, for what type of
Right.
doctor you want.
I mean, I was interested in emergency med for a long time because I like that sort of like everything's very much more so in the moment. I don't think I could have stood like oncology or something like that where you can like help ease your patients, but ultimately there's just not the technology to do enough for them. I think with emergency med, all of the situations, it's very much like it's fixable in the moment, and I like to be able to do that.
I like
Wow.
that a lot.
Yeah, I love that. um, my mom is an ER nurse, and she always like says that it's like what exactly like the only department she would want to work in, right? And I was like, why? Because it's like I think I would find it really stressful. But yeah, I think it is really amazing. Um, like just wanting to help people. What was like the first book or one of the first books that ever made you cry?
I think one of the earliest ones was probably Wild Hunt by, I don't entirely remember the author, but I do remember picking it up at like the Scholastic Book Fair in elementary school. And I think I only did it because I liked the dog on the cover. But I remember it was about this boy whose parents were deployed in, I think it was Afghanistan or something like in the Middle East, and he went to stay with his grandparents. And his grandfather was just very standoffish, and it sort of pushed him to run away with like a dog and this gun to survive out in the wilderness. And in the end, when he came back, it was just this very emotional scene where his grandfather sort of like he was very tough because he was afraid of just letting people in and being hurt again because he had lost his son in the military before. And it was just that scene of like your family as we come together. I think that was the first time that a book really made me cry.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think like family stuff is always the stuff that gets me too. Like especially like you know, mental relationships. Because it's like I don't know, like the amount that like when you have a child, you just like love that child is like so so beautiful to me, you know, and like also yeah, the thing of like when somebody's really like cold and then they like finally let somebody in. I just I love that so much. It's one of my favorite things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Eve, would you like to ask the next question?
Yes. I actually 100% agree, and that's also like I see that in your story too, Mira, because that's like obviously it's romantic, but I think it's still family, and it's
Mm-hmm.
there's also some definite familial dynamics in there. Like let's talk about the Empress, like that. Let's talk about the desertion, like we were talking about earlier about like the preference to boys and like all of that. That's like definitely a really big theme in your story, and I think you portray it really well. And so that is my next question. What was your like favorite, not not necessarily part to write, but like character or character trait or theme specifically in the story?
I think the theme of found family was probably one of my favorite ones to include in the story because I've always loved reading it, and I like the idea of how family isn't necessarily who you're born to or who you're related to, but it's who you find and it's who you love.
Yes, I also am obsessed with found family, but like, okay, this is a very unpopular opinion. I don't like specifically lesbian friends to lovers. I can't tell you why, but I hate it. You have like a favorite or at least favorite trope? Please say lesbian friends to lovers because everyone hates me for it, but I swear.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go against you on that one. I do still like that trope. Um, I guess like just a very traditional trope that I've never really liked is like the shy girl with like the bad boy. I just could not.
Stop. Have you watched Good Girls?
I have not. No.
It's just it's a TV show on Netflix and it
Mhm.
kind of follows that. Like not really, but like I'm literally obsessed. So hard agree.
Mm.
Um, um, yeah, I don't like really like that either. I think what bothers me a lot of the time, and maybe I'm a really nitpicky person, is that like if a relationship happens in like a book and it's like even if it's really cute or like in a movie or anything, and I don't think it would last past the end of the book, right? Like the shy girl like bad boy thing, it's like okay, but could you start a family together? Probably not. You know, like could you like I don't think this relationship is gonna last the year, right? So I can't get emotionally attached, which like your book, exact opposite. I want them to be together forever. I want them to, you know, this is yeah, all of eternity. I'd like them to be together. Um, Speaking of things that we don't like, maybe tropes. What is the worst character or like character archetype that you think you've read? Like, what really bothers you in a character?
Hmm. I think, I think I've mentioned this before, but just like a character who's, I guess the Mary Sue sort of. I don't know that that's necessarily an archetype, but when a character just seems a little too perfect to the point where they're unrealistic, that's when it starts bothering me.
Like can we talk about sprinting in heels and like
Hmm.
killing people? Oh, when When you snap off a heel off a shoe, it doesn't turn into flats. Dear male riders everywhere, it does not turn into flats. It makes the shoe less wearable. Like, yeah.
I definitely see that trope too.
Yeah. Like I don't know if you guys know like the subreddit like men writing women, where it's just like men who have like obviously not interacted with a woman for like longer than 15 minutes ever. Right, and they'll have like just like really really weird stuff in there like and it's like, how do you, we're 50% of the population, like you should really know how women work. Yeah, because like, and then the other thing is like a lot of like female authors write really strong, or not strong, but like really, you know, likable, good male protagonist, right? And it's like male writers can't do the same thing, which, right? It's like maybe put in a little bit of effort to try and understand women. I feel like this has just turned into like a rant about things that we don't like in books, but there's so much to not like.
No, but as you should.
What is a book, or it could be like a movie or anything that you think that like everyone should experience?
See, since you were on the topic of chick flicks, my mind is very much on Legally Blonde. That was like
It's
is
fantastic.
like one of my favorite comfort movies ever. I watch it and it's just Elwood girl bossing for like however long that movie is, and I just think it's wonderful to see.
Yes, I watch it before every single finals week. Yes.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah. There's so many like iconic lines that's like, you're in Harvard, you got into Harvard Law School. It's like, yeah, is it hard? I was like, I love you. Like literally. Yeah. My icon, honestly.
My mentality, my like ideal mentality, especially like with college apps and stuff, like that's what I don't, what, like it's hard? Yes. Yes.
Just like such a fantastic film. I fully agree. I think everyone should watch it. I heard somebody in there's like somebody in my science class who I like overhear their conversation sometimes, and I'm like, okay, I don't like you. And then he said something about Legally Blonde, and I was like, no, this is where we draw the line. You cannot have this opinion. I cannot allow you to have this opinion. I'm so protective of that film. Okay, this has been so wonderful. And before we go, do you have any projects or shout outs, or like literally anything that you want to plug right now before we close it all up?
Yeah, not really anything specific, but I loved writing this story so much for Novely that it is a bit on the shorter side, so novella, that I'm considering taking that legend and sort of running with it, and it's turned into a novel actually. And I'm working on it right now.
Oh my god, that's so exciting. What? Please send it to us. We will like please. We are its two biggest fans. Um that's amazing. I'm literally so excited to read it. Yeah. That sounds super fantastic. And yeah, let us know if you when you finish that, and we will share it with the world. I'll tell everyone I know to go read it. So a huge thanks once again to Mira for being here. And if you are interested in reading River of Stars, or if you want to learn more about our work at Novely, make sure to check out www.novely.org. And other than that, have a great day.